In this lesson, we're going to learn how to set up reference images for our character. Alright, so welcome to the final level of the 3ds Max Modeling Quick Start course. And we're going to start out with setting up a reference image for our character. So to get started with this, I'm going to go ahead and maximize my perspective view. I'm going to hit Alt and W to do that, and then I'm going to go to my front view by hitting F on the keyboard. Now in here we're going to create a plane, and you can drag out a plane that could be any size at this time, because what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and type in a value. So I'm going to type in my length and width at 200 by 200. I'm also going to remove any length and width segments that I have on my plane. So let's go ahead and take those back down to 1. Now with that, let's hit G on the keyboard so we can see our reference image plane that we're going to be using. Now to apply a reference image to this plane, we're going to have to create a material with our image. So to get started with this, let's go ahead and go up to Material, and then we're going to drag in just a standard material. Now let's go ahead and move over in our material editor, and you could use the middle mouse button to pan around in the view. And then we're going to left click and drag on the input or the output for our diffuse color. So we're going to the input for that. And then we're going to go to bitmap, and then we're going to go up one folder, and we're going to go to scene assets. Now this is in your project files folder. Now let's go to images, and you'll see that we have two different images here. We have our front reference and we have our profile reference. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my front reference here, and then I'm going to double click on this main material. And we're going to go to our blend basic parameters, and we're going to set our self-illumination value all the way up to 100. So that way we get a nice clean look here. Now with this material set, let's go ahead and apply that to our object. But you'll notice on the object we don't see our image. We need to make sure that we have Show Shaded Material in Viewport on, and there you can see your image. Let's go ahead and close our material for right now, and let's take a look at what we have. Now this image, it does look pretty good, but you might have a couple of issues where your image looks to be a little too pixelated. So with this, to get this to appear as full res as possible, we need to go up to Views at the top, and then we're going to go to Viewport Configuration. Now inside of our Viewport Configuration, we want to go to our Display Performance. Here in our Display Performance, you want to make sure that you have your baked procedural texture maps and everything set to a certain amount of pixels. So the maximum that I have set for all of mine is 2K maps. Okay, now let's hit apply on this and then OK, but you'll notice that it does appear pretty well, but it still doesn't seem like it's as smooth as it could be. And the reason for that is because we're working in our realistic render mode, but it's not connecting to the image itself. So to connect that image, we're going to click on Realistic, and then we're going to go to Materials, and we're going to say Realistic Materials with Maps. Clicking on that, you'll see that everything gets much sharper. Okay. So now, with this image in place, let's go ahead and create a copy of this, because now we need to create our profile image. So let's hit P on the keyboard to go to our perspective view. With this plane selected, let's grab our rotation tool, and I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. Now to make sure that that rotates 90 degrees, I'm going to turn on my angle snap, and then hold down Shift and drag that along the the Z direction. So now that that has been rotated 90 degrees, we want to make sure that it is set to copy, and we only want one. Let's hit OK, and then now what we want to do is we want to separate these reference images. Now looking at the profile reference image, or the new reference image that we just created, you'll see that we still have the original image and material. So we want to go ahead and apply a new material to this. So I'm going to go to my material editor, and with this material selected, I'm going to hold down Shift and then drag that down. And you'll notice that it creates a copy. Now it's still connected to that original bitmap, and I want to remove that. So I'm going to right click or left click on that connection, and it should turn white. Then we'll right click on that connection, and we'll hit a delete. Or actually, I'm sorry, let's just hit delete on the keyboard. Excuse me. I'm thinking of another software. So now that we have this reference image set, let's double click on it and let's left click and drag on the diffuse color input and go to bitmap, and this time we're going to use the profile reference. Let's hit open, and that should be applied, and we should still have our plane selected over here. So make sure that that says plane 002 that you have selected. Let's bring back our material editor, and then we're going to assign that to our object, and you'll see that that has been applied. Now if it shows up as white or gray, you need to make sure that you hit show shaded material in viewport. Alright, so now that we have our materials set up, let's finish setting up the reference images. Now looking at this, I can't model this way, okay, because they're right on top of one another, and that's not going to be helpful. So I'm going to select the front image, okay, which is the character here, and then we're going to move it back in the Y direction. Now the reason that we're going to move it back in the Y direction is because when we're looking through our front view, it will appear as if nothing has changed. So on my Y, in my perspective view, I'm going to drop this back to 100. So type in 100 and hit enter. You'll see that that falls back, but if we go back to our front view, it appears as if there's no change. That's because we're pushing it back in the screen space that is pointing toward you. Okay. Now let's take this reference image and we want to push that in the X direction, in a positive direction. So we're going to type in 100 on that one, and you should get pretty close to being corner to corner. Now if you want to give yourself some more room, that's totally fine. We can always take this up to 150 on both of those, and that should give us plenty of room. So now that I have these reference images set, there's one minor thing that we have to take care of. If you look in the front reference image, it looks as if the character is facing in this direction. But if you take a look at the profile, the character is facing in the opposite direction, and that's not going to help us while we're modeling. So what we need to do is we need to flip this profile reference image. Now this can be done very easily. We could rotate the plane and then flip the normal, or we could simply flip it using the material. So let's go to our material editor, and let's go to the map option. So double click on that bitmap, and you'll see that you're working in the profile reference. And then we want to tile this object, but we want to tile it in the U direction in a negative direction. So let's take the tiling U to -1 and hit enter. And you'll see that the character has flipped around. So let's close that. And then now what we're ready to do is go ahead and freeze our reference images so we don't move those by accident. So let's select both of those reference images, and then I'm going to right click and go to my object properties. Going into the object properties, you'll have your general panel, and in here we want to turn off an option, and that's called show frozen in gray. Whenever we freeze these objects, they will turn gray and we won't be able to see our material. So we want to make sure that we uncheck that, so that way that doesn't happen. And then while we're here, we'll hit freeze and then OK. Now I can no longer select those objects. If I want to select those objects later on, I would need to right click and go to unfreeze all. So now you have successfully set up your reference images, and if we go to our front view, we can see the front of our character hitting F on the keyboard, and then if I go to my left view hitting L on the keyboard, I can see my character in this direction as well. Alright, so in the next lesson what we're going to do is we're going to get started with working on a character, and I'm going to show you several techniques for creating a character that could be used in animation. So we're not creating props any longer. We're creating objects that could have that could be skinned and animated later on. So we need to make sure that we have our edge flow for deformation in certain areas, and we'll start talking about those next.